A boy and a girl, brother and sister, are home alone. And it's raining outside. And there's nothing to do in the house.
Oh no, they're so bored.
That's right. All we could do was sit. And there was not fun. There was no fun, not one little bit, right? Okay. So I've read it a bunch of times to my kids. It's a phenomenal book, and you'll see why. Okay. Now, they're sitting there totally bored when all of a sudden, their mom's out for the day. And all of a sudden they hear a knock at the door. And who shows up but the Cat in the Hat? And he says, even though it's not nice and not sunny, we can still have some good fun that is funny. And he comes and he starts having some fun. So the first thing he does is he starts taking all of his mom's stuff, his like fancy stuff, and starts balancing, juggling, right? A book and on his nose, and then a boat, and then plates and dishes and cups and whatever. And he's like, look what I can do. And all of a sudden, everything comes crashing down, right? And then he says, oh, no, but I have another game. Now, by the way, also, the brother and the sister have this goldfish, right? The goldfish is kind of the voice of reason. And he says, don't let that cat into the house, right? Your mother would not like that at all. He's kind of like he's the parent, so to speak. Now, what kind of a mother leaves their children home with a goldfish? Now, we'll get to that, right? That's an important part of the story. So then he brings out, you remember what he brings out next? No. Thing one and thing two. These like wild little children animals that run around the house. They fly a kite in the house, knocking over the paintings, ruining the dress. You've never read The Cat in the Hat?
No, I have. I'm remembering it from the movie.
I think there was a babysitter there.
So I think the movie embellishes the story a bit. It's not exactly the same story. Yeah?
So good. The Cat in the Hat. Such a good movie.
Yeah. Michael Myers. I think Michael Myers was the Cat in the Hat.
I never watched the movie. It's real people or is it cartoon?
It was real. It was real.
That's so good.
Should you movie class?
Now, by the way, you can do this if you look up Jordan Peterson. When he's you've heard of him?
No.
No one's heard of Jordan Peterson? Very, very famous, like public intellectual. He was I know, but he became famous like 5 years ago. I was like he used to be. I mean, he was a psychology professor and a clinical psychologist for a very long time, and then all of a sudden he started posting these YouTube videos that made him very, very, very famous. And he is still very, very famous. But if you go look up Jordan Peterson, he has entire classes studying fairy tales, like Pinocchio, and he goes into what is the meaning and the symbolism of Pinocchio, and it's very, very deep. And he says a lot of the Disney movies, especially the early ones, The Lion King, the early Disney movies were very, very complex. Okay, so we're back here in The Cat in the Hat. So now the kids recognize that the whole house is wrecked. And not only that, but the goldfish says, but your mother's coming home. So now the boy has to do something. So he takes a net and he traps the thing one and thing two. He puts them back in their box and he says to the Cat in the Hat, get out, just get out. So the Cat in the Hat is kind of sad because now he can't play anymore. He walks out of the house and they're looking around and the mother is like down the road. And they're looking around and everything's a wreck. So what do? They have no idea what to do. When all of a sudden the Cat in the Hat comes back in with this fancy machine that has lots of hands coming out of it and sweeping and dusting and cleaning and putting everything away. And just like that, everything is back the way that it started. And then he leaves and that's it. And then the mother walks in the door and the mother says, well, did you have fun today? What did you do today? And it ends off saying, what would you do? Would you tell your mom? And that's the story. Okay, questions. First we have to start with the questions on the story.
Okay, how old are these kids?
Why are the kids home alone? This is the biggest question on the story.
And how is the fish a mother?
And how is the fish? Who is this fish who's the acting guardian of these kids, who's making sure that they don't do anything too unruly? Good. What else?
I think my kids don't look at fish. The cat.
Who's the cat? Who is this guy? Why'd you just...
Pedophile.
What's the idea that this random figure comes in?
Open the door for him.
Scary.
Why should it's a bit scary, right? He's a total stranger. He's a total stranger. Now, mind you, by the way, the whole thing about stranger danger that really came about a lot more in the 80s. It's actually an interesting story that it's not as if, meaning kids who grew up in the 60s and 70s had a tremendous amount of freedom. They would just roam the streets. In the 80s, something changed all that. Do you know what changed?
Oh, cable?
Creeps.
Yes.
No, for real. My mom
Cable
would say
news.
that for
Cable
a really
news.
long time, she was just
All of a
outside.
sudden, there were 24-hour news stations.
Yeah.
And those news stations had to get viewers. So what would they do? They would emphasize the amount of crime and abductions,
Scare everyone?
and to scare you because it gets viewers.
That is terrible.
And so the number of abductions, the number of crimes didn't actually go up, but people just thought about it
Yeah,
more.
but the crime was really bad back then also.
So, well, there were places like New York City where in the 70s and 80s crime was horrific, but not across the country. Across the country was the same. Yeah, but okay, that's New York City. But everyone who was living outside of the city, living in the suburbs, whatever, it wasn't any different. But all of a sudden, parents said, I'm no longer letting my kids out. It's only going to be supervised play. There was this thing in the 80s and 90s called helicopter parenting.
Oh, I think I'm going to be a helicopter parent. So
Do not be a helicopter parent. I'll tell you why, okay? Helicopter parenting is one of the reasons why today people are so messed up they can't do anything for themselves.
I get so nervous.
The reason it's okay if you get nervous, but that's your thing. You got to work out. But
you're a
don't penalize your children because you get nervous. I'm serious.
I know.
Because they have to learn how to solve their own problems. They have to. You have to, as a parent, it's the hardest thing in the world to do, but the most important thing that you can do as a parent is to help them become an adult.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they'll be kids forever. I'm telling you, I still don't know how to make my own doctor's appointments. I love my mom, but she never told me to do it. So she just did it all the time.
Me too. It's so
Like, Mom, please.
Yeah, so you just gotta do it, man, right? Okay, so who's the cat? What's he doing? Why would they let him in? And what's this whole story with the cat? He's this is he responsible? He's totally irresponsible. All he likes to do is play and have fun. He lets out these wild animals of
Thing one and
thing one and thing two. What's going on? And then he leaves and then he cleans everything up.
Responsible.
Okay. And there's another interesting question. There's no father in the story.
Oh.
You only know about the mom.
Yeah.
We don't know. We don't know. And I think, if I remember correctly, there's one picture where you can see the mom's bedroom, and I think there's only a single bed. I can't remember.
That's like looking so deep.
Well, you got to look into it. Yeah, because you have to ask yourself the question, why was this such a popular book? This book, you've no idea, changed all of children's books forever. Even today, children's books are still basing themselves off in some way off of Dr. Seuss. Yeah.
I feel like the children don't understand.
Children don't understand, but subconsciously they understand. Now, this was written in the 1950s, and things were happening. Things were changing in society. It was post-World War II. There was a lot of economic prosperity, but there was also a lot of changes. Women were now entering the workforce, which is why the mother wasn't home. And people were bored. There was this kind of boredom of sitting at home. Like, people were no longer they had enough money that you had a lot more leisure time. It used to be that nobody had time to do anything. Like, you were lucky if you went to school after the age of 13 because you had to go home and help. People were very poor and everyone was engaged in some sort of activity or work. So now all of a sudden, kids can sit home, they can be alone. The mom's out, she's working. She might even be a single mom. because that's also what's changing in society is the breakdown of the nuclear family. And then in the 1950s, there's this kind of, you ever see like TV shows from the 1950s, like Leave It to Beaver? It's this kind of very, like, everything's happy and everything's fine and we're not rocking the boat and like there's nothing controversial. Only by the 1960s, late 1960s, when you had a whole generation of people who grew up like that post-World War II, that's what started the hippie movement, the counterculture revolutionary movement. People were bored. They did not like this very cookie-cutter, boxy society where everything was happy and everything was good and everyone has a dishwasher and and 2 cars. It was a boring society and it was a very restrictive society. And so that's what sparked all of this crazy, American history in the 1960s, 1970s is really interesting because these young people feel like we need to change something. We're so bored. We need to get out of ourselves. We need to connect to spirituality and do a lot of drugs. We need to fight the racism and the sexism and right? We're looking for a cause. But right now they're just bored.
I think the 60s through like the 90s to 2000 was like the coolest part of like.
Well,
like
I mean, it was cool, but it was a lot of there was a lot of ups and downs.
I know, but like the way things just changed so like
yeah.
Such fast.
Look, I can tell you, growing up in the 90s in America was amazing. I mean, everyone was happy. There was a lot of prosperity. People were doing well. It was a very exciting time. It was the end of communism, the end of communist Russia, and in 1989 is when the Berlin Wall fell, and shortly thereafter the communist Russia fell. What?
You had to escape Russia.
Yeah, many people did. I know people they came to the United States when they were 2, 3, 4, 5 years old with their parents. So you're now living in a society where there's absolute boredom and there's nothing to do. Now what happens when you live in a world of boredom? What happens?
Get into trouble.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. When people aren't active, when people aren't busy, when there isn't something to do, you invite chaos. The cat in the hat represents ultimate chaos.
That's true.
It's totally true. So the cat in the hat starts juggling things, right? Because he's looking for fun. He's just looking for something to do. But when you do that, you're just inviting destruction and disorder into the world. And by the way, mind you, fun involves a little bit of disorder and chaos. There needs to be a little bit of chaos in fun. Playing games and playing there's always a little bit of, a good game is something that has some rules, but not too many rules. And that's what allows a little bit of, excitement, because you don't know what's going to happen. So a good system is one where there's just enough rules and enough structure to keep us occupied, but at the same time it gives you enough creative freedoms that you can be excited and you don't know what's going to happen. But when it's all rules, or in this case, there's no rules because everything's just so boring. Now you invite tons of chaos. And the kids are grappling with this, and he invites these thing 1 and thing 2, which are just the epitome of chaos. That at least the cat in the hat is well-intentioned, right? He likes to have fun. He doesn't mean to destroy anything. And eventually we see that the cat in the hat, because he's magical, can eventually clean everything up. Thing 1 and thing 2, they're not even people, they're things. They are total wild animals. So he lets them loose and they're running amok. So now the kids, once they see what happens when there's boredom, then they realize that they have to spring into action. When they see that their mother's coming home and the goldfish is the voice of conscience, but he's a fish, so he can't actually do anything. He's totally powerless. So that's when the kids have to finally take responsibility. They trap thing 1 and thing 2, and they tell the cat in the hat to get out of there. Now ultimately the story has to end well, and the cat in the hat, because he's a magical being, can somehow come in and restore everything back to order. But the story itself is speaking to a generation of children who feel like these kids. They feel like there's nothing you can do, and everything is boring. And everything is the same. And they want a cat in the hat in their lives. But the problem is that the cat in the hat gets out of hand.
You gotta balance it.
That's right. So it's an incredible story about what happens when you have a society where things are too boring, there isn't enough to do, There isn't enough structure. So at that point, people look for trouble. It's amazing. We create the drama that we need in our lives. We really do. If things are not interesting enough, we'll make it interesting, which is so scary because what it really means is like you'll look for ways of getting into arguments and fights with your friends and family, even if there's nothing to fight about. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yes. So what comes out of it is that we have to learn that in order to structure our lives in a very healthy way, you need to give your kids some sort of discipline, but then you need to give them enough latitude that they can roam free. The book Planting and Building. You ever seen that book? Binyan v'Zriya B'Chinuch. Rav Volbe.
Yeah, we learned that.
Yeah. So that's exactly this point. The building is the structure and the discipline, and the planting is the organic growth that comes with giving them a little bit of time to be creative and free.
So it's like an interesting concept.
That's the cat in the hat. It's pretty amazing when you think about it. And you can do this with a lot of things, a lot of books. Like, look, Agada is phenomenal, and it's way deeper than the cat in the hat. And the lessons that we learn are deep Kabbalistic ideas in Torah and whatever. But you can take this same tool, the same principle of how we look for themes and patterns, and you can use it on everything. This is, if you go to if you have a good English teacher. I had a very good English teacher in high school, and maybe that's the reason why I like this stuff so much. But we had such an amazing English teacher, and we were reading. You ever read Pride and Prejudice? Yeah. You've read it? Amazing, amazing book. Jane Austen. And he showed us how if you read the first paragraph of the book, you'll know all the themes in the book. If you read it deeply. It's amazing. These people really knew what they were doing. So it gets that, like, this stuff helps you to unlock a lot of doors in your life. Because without this type of analytical thinking, you'll read the news and you'll take it at face value. You'll read a book and you won't know what's going on a deeper level. Even films, and of course Torah, you'll read it at a very, very simple level and be like, well, that was a nice story. Yeah, but what is the story teaching? What is it telling you? What does it mean? Why were Adam and Chava in a garden? Why were they in a garden? Why a garden? Like, you just ask the simplest questions and it's telling you something very, very fundamental. So, yeah. I'm trying to think if there's another, Goodnight Moon. Goodnight Moon is really amazing. Do you want to know why kids like Goodnight Moon so much? Okay. I feel like, is this a Torah class?
No, it is.
Goodnight Moon. Go through the pages of Goodnight Moon. It's scary.
Yeah.
Goodnight Moon is a little bit scary. It's a little bit scary. Children, when they're very, very young, like the idea of coming into contact with things that are a little bit scary, but showing how it can be safe. Okay? So what's scary in Goodnight Moon? So
It's like dark.
so there's a fire. First of all, nighttime. This is the first thing that the bunny that's going to sleep doesn't want to go to sleep because nighttime is scary.
It is scary.
It is, yes. So the whole point of Goodnight Moon is slowly and gradually walking the bunny into nighttime to show the bunny that the nighttime's not scary. However, in the house itself, there's some scary things. There's a fireplace. Fire is scary. Now, if you'll notice this, there's a bear rug on the floor.
That's so creepy.
That is very scary. It's very scary. Yes, but then there's bears sitting on chairs, right? So there's you see that, like, it's showing the bunny that it doesn't have to be as scared of bears, right? Mm-hmm. There's a mouse, there's a cat, there's animals in the room, right? And gradually, as we go, we're reminding the bunny that everything in the room is familiar, even though it looks different in the dark.
Exposure therapy.
It's exposure therapy. That's exactly what it is. Good night, mush. Good night, good night, brush. Good night, kittens. Good night, mittens. We know what they are. You're aware of them, right? And there is an old lady whispering hush until the very end, right? And then the old lady leaves. Good night, stars. Good night, moon. Good night. The best one is good night, nobody. Remember that page?
No,
Good night, nobody.
That's so freaky.
Yeah. Good night, nobody. I always wondered if that's like a dig at religion. I wasn't sure. They say that, I can't remember who was the poet, the early Israeli poet who wrote the song Na'ad-Nade. Na'ad-Nade, Na'ad-Nade.
My childhood.
It's a seesaw. Raid, ale, ale, vered. It goes down, goes up, goes up, goes down. Mala, 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 mata. What's up and what's above and what's below? Rak, ani, ve'ata. Just me and you. So I think he was saying, there's only me and you here. There's nothing above. I think I've heard that was like a subtle dig at religion, but I don't know, that's hard to say. But you don't realize, guys, like people are inserting these crazy hidden messages into things all the time.
Yeah,
The world's a very complex place.
our friend from last year, her dad is a Disney animator. And
Yeah.
her sister's back here this year.
Yeah.
And he like hid certain things in pictures, like on which one did he hide? Winnie
Winnie the Pooh.
Winnie the Pooh.
Yeah.
Look at it, he hid it.
In which one?
You can't really see it, but if you stop, if you
He
pause it at that second,
like Google Winnie
I have
the
the
Pooh,
picture.
whatever.
Yeah, and there's a mezuzah on Winnie's door.
yeah.
That's really funny.
Yeah.
He did tons of stuff like that.
Yeah.
Right.
Like a kippah. Did he do a kippah?
Did he do a kippah? Right outside of London, you can go visit the 100-acre wood. You can go visit the place where the writer wrote and the source of inspiration for Winnie the Pooh. And what they've done, I don't know who did this, but they've created it. So when you walk in, it has a sign that says the 100-acre wood.
That's so cute.
And you can go, and there's a little house for Winnie the Pooh, and you can see a stuffed doll of Winnie the Pooh in the house, and you can see the bridge where they play Pooh sticks, and you can see that they have all the things. They have Roo,
It's
and
cute for like a little kid. But
it was very cute.
Watching
Yeah.
the watching of the guards. You know how what are those videos?
Yeah, the changing of the guards.
They scare the guards and they scream back. What is that whole thing?
Yeah, the guards are just not allowed to talk or move.
But then they scream and scare you.
Yeah, maybe, I don't
To show
know.
you that you can't talk to them.
Yeah,
Or you
I'm
can't
not
touch
sure.
them.
Yeah, could be.
Like touch them.
Like,
Yeah, you
Winnie the
can't
Pooh
touch them.
has so many like life lessons. It's different.
Yeah, well, Winnie the Pooh was very deep. There was
a doc.
a book. There was actually a book.
Can I ruin it for you?
You know what? May's dad wrote it.
She's schizophrenic.
Yeah.
That's why she has all those dolls.
Stop.
There was a
That was my favorite.
what was?
I used to have all the
Okay.
toys.
Doesn't it make so much more
There was a
sense?
book. There was a book
Why
called.
is she talking to these lifeless things?
Right, trying to
Maybe she just-
No, children.
But nobody else.
Children have no.
But no one knows. It's only her.
Children have.
He was a big part of it.
No. Children have imaginary friends all the time,
No, but like.
and actually, it's a sign of intelligence to have an imaginary friend,
No,
because
I
you
know.
are literally creating another being, right, in your imagination. It's a very hard thing to do. There was a book called The Tao of Pooh. The Tao of Pooh, which analyzed the characters in Winnie the Pooh as representing different Eastern religions. So you had Taoism and Confucianism and Buddhism, and Winnie the Pooh was like the wisest of them all, right? Even though there was the wise owl who thought he was wise, and there was the worrying rabbit who was always worrying, and
Inside Out.
But Inside Out's much
there you go.
Disney makes all these movies and shows to a lot of the shows we grew up with, like all of Disney Junior, tons of them are based on like diseases that kids have.
Why do they do? What's the point of that?
What's the point of what?
It's to make kids feel heard and whatever.
Yeah, okay, but look, in recent times, so
She just said Caillou has alopecia.
so you have to know.
Cancer.
You have to know. in recent times, the stories have been getting a lot more shallow.
Yeah.
And the reason why is because a real story is actually something that has depth and conflict and a little bit of tension, and you're not always sure how things resolve. In recent times, the stories have turned more into propaganda. So the animators or the producers or the network has some moral that they want to teach you, and the story is basically just a reenactment of that story so that you can learn how to be more tolerant or whatever, right? But a real story is one where, first of all, it keeps getting deeper and deeper, and there's a lot of layers. And second of all, you don't always know what the answer is or what the right thing is to do at the end of the story. You know? Like, you know how we saw the whole, like when we saw the story, when we read the story of Abraham, right? It's a palace, but it's also burning, right? That's not resolved. We don't resolve that part of the story. And in the case of the Cat in the Hat, it's like, what would you do? Would you tell your mom or not? Today, it's like, we should always tell our parents everything, and you should never let a stranger into the house. But this is flirting with something that's a little bit of a dangerous idea so that we can ourselves come to some resolution. And that's what makes a story so amazing, is that the story never gets old. A story that just has like a nice pat answer at the end of the day, where it's like, yeah, you should always tolerate people. Well, okay, that's a very boring story. It's a very boring answer. So stories have been getting, because people are worried about their children reading the wrong things or seeing the wrong things, so they want things where, we know it's a pre-approved message. And of course, that's why certain older stories are now being censored.
Yeah, like what is that?
No.
Dr. Seuss books are being censored, and Roald Dahl books are being censored, and
Snowflake generation.
what?
Wasn't like half of Dr. Seuss's books
Some of them were censored. Some of them were the ones where he had a couple of books where he portrayed different ethnicities in a way that today people thought that they were offensive, right? So a Chinese person he called a Chinaman, which is offensive for some reason because he's a China man. Yeah, exactly.
Generation.
Yeah, what time is it right now?
10:28.
10:29.
Okay, thanks.
Elmo used to scare me. Like Evil Elmo.
What's
Did
that?
anyone ever see Evil Elmo?
Blue's Clues.
Evil Elmo. No, I don't think
I don't know.
so.
I heard about Israeli TV.
Also, Barney was a Yeah, Barney was sort of
Like, I grew up on Yuval Noah Harari. Does anyone know what that is? Yuval Noah Harari?
No.
All the elites. You've never watched the Bears?
No, but you know
It
what?
was an Israeli show.
Oh, the places you'll go. That's good.
Oh, the Places You'll Go is actually a very depressing book.
I love that book.
Oh, the Places You'll Go is like a book it's a book that people they often give to like college graduates or whatever. But if you read the book, like the majority of the pages are very sad and depressing. It's all about how, you'll do great things unless you don't, and you won't. And sometimes you'll fail, and sometimes you'll be alone, and sometimes things will be very dark. And sometimes oh yeah. No, it's true, but it's like, it's a heavy book. It's a heavy book.
No, but it's like you could go down but then go back up.
You can go down and go back.
It's so from.
I think it's a superpower for people to just pull something out of their mouth like that.
Yeah,
I think it's not.
Well, okay. While we're on that subject, it's not a superpower. We've just forgotten how to memorize things. It used to be that how many of you had to memorize a poem for school?
I had to memorize 600 words.
I don't know about a poem.
That's amazing. You should be so grateful that you were taught how to memorize. Today we think, oh, well, because now that we have phones that we can carry around all of the world's information, we don't need to memorize things anymore. But memorization is incredible. I'll tell you why. So first of all, the way that people used to learn Torah and Talmud was memorizing, right? They would memorize it, they would just talk it, they would speak it out all the time.
Well, that's when you have to leave.
The Talmud wasn't, Torah Shebiksav you're not supposed to actually memorize. You can memorize, but you're not supposed to read it outside of reading, you're not supposed to say it outside of reading. But Talmud, people just memorize the whole thing. the thing about memorization is the way that you integrate something is first you are able to just recall it at memory. And then afterwards, the more you say it and the more you say it, the more you say it, the deeper it goes in. So when you've memorized something, it's like you're taking a beautiful idea with you wherever you go. And people who memorize poetry, they're constantly thinking about how life reflects the poem. And they're always thinking about, oh, this reminds me of this Shakespeare, and this reminds me of this, this Wordsworth, or whatever it is.
Have you ever heard of the Dash poem?
The Dash poem? No.
You should read it.
Okay.
What is it? I don't want to spoil it.
Okay.
But like, what's the concept? Like, what? It's about like your life.
Famously there was some teacher who said that they had a student whose name was this and didn't know how to pronounce it. Ladasha.
No.
Shakespeare spelled it?
Ladasha.
That's so funny.
That can't be what? What's that?
It was a viral thing. The teacher had a student whose names were written this and didn't know how to pronounce it. And the student's name was Ladasha.
No.
I think it's generation.
It sounds black.
Sorry, I'm a little bit racist.
That's not racist. That's cultural. They have names like that.
Ladasha?
No, but then that's going back to the same thing of saying a Chinaman.
Yeah, okay.
I don't think that's racist at all.
I don't know.
They all have Shaniqua.
Shaniqua. That was
Like
my
all those names, it's very part of culture.
Yeah, just like Miriam. Like, oh, she's Jewish.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's true.
Well, they think it is. That's why I got nervous. I don't want to insult anyone.
So to recap, yeah, we've gone through The Cat in the Hat. We've gone through a little bit of Goodnight Moon. We've gone through a little bit of Disney movies, the old movies, the new movies, Winnie the Pooh. This stuff is the world is amazing. The world is amazing, and the reason why we have stories like these, and the reason why every third word in the Chumash is, the first word in the Chumash, Bereshis. You famously know it can't be understood simply, right? It is grammatically incorrect.
Yeah.
That's because Hashem is teaching you that in order to truly understand the world, you have to look deeper. The world at a simple level, if you spend any amount of time looking at the world, you'll look around at the world and say, something doesn't make sense here. Something doesn't make sense. Why is it that the people with the worst midos, the people who have the worst values, seem to be the most successful? How is that? Why is it that the most disgusting human beings all become the leaders of governments and countries? Like, how is that possible? What's going on? Why is it that you value one person who can be a great lawyer, a great banker, but has terrible PR, will not do as well as somebody who's very mediocre but has great marketing? Does that make sense to you? Like, it just doesn't add up. And so this is why we have to train ourselves to look deeper at midrash, at under the pshat, under the skin deep. So we're learning how to be more discerning human beings. All right.
Thank you.